Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Betty Cruz, and I'm with the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh. Our mission is to convene and connect people around global issues to build a thriving, competitive, and inclusive Pittsburgh. And our vision is for a globally minded and globally connected world that is equitable and just for all. Today's program is part of a community conversation series we have been hosting in partnership with Repair the World and One Hood over the last year, thanks to funding from the Heinz Endowments. These events have created space for community members with different lived experiences and points of view to come together, share, and learn from one another. We are grateful to be building a bigger table for tonight's program, thanks to my brother's keeper and the 412 Black Jewish Collaborative. Thank you all so much for your partnership. It's really exciting to be here tonight. And with that, I'm excited to introduce the moderator for our program, Josiah Gillam. Josiah serves as the My Brother's Keeper coordinator in the mayor's office, which focuses on the collective impact serving Black men and boys alongside other intersectional initiatives. Josiah is a Pittsburgh resident and serves on the board of directors for PUMP and the Union Project. Without further delay, Josiah, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Betty, and to the entire World Affairs Council team. Thank you so much for all of your help, and greetings to all of you. Thank you so much for registering and signing up to be here with us in the moment. For those of you that are watching on live on Facebook, we appreciate your time and interest. It means a lot to us. And I also want to thank One Hood, Repair the World Pittsburgh, and on behalf of the 412 Black Jewish Collaborative, it's just such a pleasure to share space with so many neighbors. What we want to do is just spend some time in community and share space together tonight, talking about themes that are important to us, coming out of COVID. What we certainly want to do is respect your time. So I want to give you a sense of how the night's going to go. We're going to have a facilitated panel discussion that really explores some of these themes and life has been like in the past year for us and where we're going from here. And then we're going to open it up to have a community conversation in breakout rooms and all together just to hear what else is on folks' mind and heart. So what I'd like to do is go around and introduce the folks that are going to be a part of the panel and then jump right into this experience. I feel like I should say, we've all gone through a lot in the past year. And so my intention as moderator, beyond all, lenses and hats and official titles, is simply to be a neighbor and to hold space for what's shared. And we invite you to do the same. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the panel. We'll start with Keshira.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kohenet Keshira haLev Fife. I am on Osage and Haudenosaunee land, and I use the pronouns she and they. Do you want me to tell you a little about myself, or do you want me to tell you what brings me here, or both?
Both, whatever's on your heart in this moment.
Great. What's on my heart in this moment is the awareness that as the world is picking up, it seems the time has begun to speed up again over the last few weeks. People are out and about more, demands are increasing. I'm aware that my internal guidance is to slow down instead of to speed up with it. And I'm doing my best to hold in tension the needs of the many people around me and the voices in my head, which tell me to try to be like everyone else, and also the innate wisdom of the body and of the soul and what it might have to tell us in this time. I'm glad to be here talking about it with you all.
Thank you so much. Itha.
Thank you, everyone, for taking the time this evening. My name is Itha Cao. I am the chef of the Hungry Cow, which is a Chinese regional cooking business and based out of Pittsburgh. And it has a dual mission of teaching Chinese American cuisine and the history and racialization of Chinese food in the US, and also donating funds to a intersectional social justice cause. So yes, I am, well, what's on my heart? So many things. Well, I think, as an East Asian American woman who is a first generation American, that means, I was born here. I think recent events, especially with the Atlanta shooting, have brought to light a lot of the issues that Asian Americans as a multi-ethnic group have been facing since Asians have been to the US. So I guess something that's really been I'm thinking about is Asian Americans in history and within Pittsburgh especially, which is a primarily Black and white city, Asians have been pretty invisible. And now we're invisible no more, but I guess my question is, for how long?
Thank you so much, Itha.
Mhm.
And Brian.
Thanks, Josiah, and thank you to the World Affairs Council. Thanks to Betty and the whole gang. Appreciate you guys allowing us to have this space and for creating this space. My name is Brian Burley. I go by the pronouns he and him, and I am the author, founder, I guess we could call it whatever sort of titles we want to have, for Young Black Pittsburgh, which is a social talent community for Black millennials in and of the Pittsburgh region. Started off as a book in 2017, and the book featured about 150 people, and then that community over the course of the coming years grew to over 4,000 and over 4,000. But I think when we talk about what's on my heart, it's, coming off of the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd, that has been weighing on me, and I didn't realize it until we had a conversation. I also serve as the diversity recruitment manager for General Mills, remotely based here in Pittsburgh, but also General Mills is based out of Minneapolis, where the murder of George Floyd took place. And coming off of the back end of that, I didn't realize that it was weighing on me. But at the same time, it's just been something where, to Keshira's point, just trying to listen to your body, to be still, right? I am a self-proclaimed, self-announced, and very comfortable in my extroverted self. So the last, 17, 18 months have been a little bit difficult for me personally. But it's also been something where I've been open to the growth and the stillness and the placement that I believe that my higher power has placed on me during this time, to just be still and to take that self and personal development time and really be intentional about that work and about how you create these spaces and how you curate your time and how you pour into yourself, right? And being that kind of extroverted person who gets so much from outside, how do you start to build more inside? And I think that level of intentionality in this time, where I can probably be super frank in saying I probably wouldn't have taken it if it wasn't for the world shutting down, has been very, very, very important for me. So really excited to be here, really excited to talk more about this and to just dig in with you guys and build this community conversation.
Yes, as you can tell, there's already so much here and so many intersections to lean into. I feel impressed to lean into that and to honor what's been shared already. Keshira, we connected a little bit earlier around this idea of healing and this idea of what folks have gone through in the past year. And I asked what you thought about kind of grounding us in the moment, in the space, in a brief mindfulness exercise, just to invite that sense of community in the moment. Would you mind sharing a little bit and then leading us in a brief experience just to honor what's been said already and to really set the stage for the conversation?
Sure. I'm going to backtrack for a moment just to tell you a couple of my affiliations to give you some more context. I'm the Kohenet and founder of Keshira Pittsburgh, which is an independent community underpinned by Jewish values, rhythms, and practices. And I am also executive director of the Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute, which is an organization dedicated to training Jewish clergy in embodied and earth-based practice. So guided breath work is fundamental to what I do in so many realms, not just because it's a mindfulness technique. I like to think first about breathing as a way of being in reciprocity with the trees, that we breathe out and they breathe in. And that each time we do this, we're in reciprocity with the trees, and so we're in reciprocity with each other. Not just the ones breathing here now, but all the ones that have ever breathed, both human and tree. I also know that when we breathe in and we breathe out for longer than we breathe in, it helps to regulate our nervous systems. This is why, as a small child, when my dad would notice my breathing getting shallow, normally when I was anxious or if I was crying, he would say, "Take a deep breath and let it go." And he would just guide me or coach me for a few breaths until I could feel my shoulders dropping. I would stop panting so much. And this exercise is one that we can do anytime. We don't need to have any equipment with us or any special music or be in any special place. anytime we feel that energy rising. And I expect that it's happening to more of us now as we enter grocery stores and find ourselves in crowded places. We're having to say yes to things where we might otherwise choose to say no, though we can lean into that breathing. The last thing I want to offer about this is that when we breathe out for longer than we breathe in, each time we renew our enlivened self, we are reminded to always take what we need, breathe in, but to give back more than we take. And if we breathe in this pattern and we move through our days in this pattern, I believe it will fundamentally shift how we relate to the world. So let's see if we can connect ourselves through breath. We'll take a breath into 4 and out to 5, and I'll count it for us. So let's breathe in together. In, 2, 3, 4, and out, 2, 3, 4, 5. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5. One more time. In, 2, 3, 4. Out, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Thank you so much. Speaking personally, I can already feel my own cup being filled, and I'm super excited to lead in further. Keshira, I'll keep it with you. You've heard the introductions from our fellow panelists so far, kind of emphasizing this theme that COVID has impacted all of us, and I hear about this invitation to consider who oneself is and how they might function in society. I hear that there have been examples of hatred and violence against people of color, people of different backgrounds, in very visible and painful ways. During the prep conversation, you talked about this concept of a neighbor, and I wondered if you would start there and just share a little bit about that.
Sure. So this idea, this concept of neighbor as a moral concept and not a geographic term comes from Rabbi Ron Simons of the Center for Loving Kindness at the JCC. And the idea is really that we find folks who are kindred, willing to be with us, to support us, not necessarily because they live down the street, that having a shared experience with someone, feeling resonance, we know now more than ever can happen across time zones. And I think what's happened this year is that many of us have found that by coming into Zoom rooms where the title sounds enticing, perhaps that's why some of you are here tonight interested in this particular conversation, might find yourself in a breakout room with someone who, quote unquote, speaks your language. More so than some of the folks you see regularly, whether that's in a congregational setting or a school or work setting. And it makes us realize that our connectedness is greater than what we might have otherwise thought. So I have big questions about what the next phase of life looks like. What does it mean for us to go back to how things used to be? Can we and should we? I have plenty of opinions about that. But what does it mean for the world that we've created, or for the worlds that we've created over this past year? How do we sustain those webs? Because what I think we've seen is that we're able to create webs strong enough to hold us, even when we're not doing that physically.
Itha, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to turn to you. We've heard a lot about this concept of solidarity in the past year, and that's certainly not a new concept for what we've been talking about in Pittsburgh, for sure. But you mentioned some of these instances of violence, and certainly there's been a racial reckoning, and there's been a lot of social justice activity and enthusiasm. What does solidarity mean to you, given your background, and how do you approach it in the wake of all that we've experienced in the last year?
Thanks, Josiah. Yeah, I think definitely I was born in New York, but I was raised in State College, which is central Pennsylvania. A lot of people laughingly call it Pennsyltucky because of the lack of racial diversity there. And it is a fairly conservative area. So, growing up there as a visibly East Asian woman, I naturally found solidarity with the Black community because, you're basically in a room and you see one other person of color there. And so I think, realizing that now as an adult, that's always been natural to me, but also now relearning a lot of the history that I wish, had been taught in school. The whole term of Asian American actually came about because of the Black Power movement and the American Indian movement in 1968. And it was actually invented by two Asian American students who found that, most Asian people at that time were trying to identify with their ethnic backgrounds, right? So Indian American, Chinese American, Korean American, and they weren't getting anywhere, right? So they found power and unity in numbers. So I think, from my personal experience growing up in State College to moving to Pittsburgh, where it is still very much a Black and white city, I think now, we see a large influx of immigrants from, Asia as a whole, whether it's to go to school or as kind of refugees to find safety in our city. We kind of see this interesting reflection of history, I guess, microcosm and macrocosm. I think especially, for those of you who don't know, I did used to work in the mayor's office as, the only East Asian representation there. And, I think that there is definitely power in being one of the few or the only one, but it can also be, it can be taxing as well. So yeah, I think definitely for a lot of Asian Americans, the past couple of years, especially, seeing a lot of the physical acts of violence against many Asian elders, even some children, getting stabbed, being beaten by pipes, setting on fire. It's been challenging. And I think also the cultural norm of what we call the Asian stoicism of just, trying to save face, pretending that everything's cool, everything's okay, it clearly isn't working. So I think this past year has been a lot of self-reflection for me on, what do I want to do and who do I want to be? And I think that this has hit many people in the Asian American community who honestly have had the choice and the option of not having to really think about that before, because there is this sense that there is a proximity to whiteness. But if there's anything this past year has taught us is that we are not white.
I want to stay there just for a quick second. Itha, you mentioned this idea of building solidarity with your Black neighbors. How has that gone in your experience? And what have you learned from being intentional in that respect?
Absolutely. Well, so I definitely, would not be where I am today without the support of primarily Black women who uplifted me, whether it's, through like an introduction to, an important person who might have then led to an internship for a job, or just even personal, like pump up talks. Giving the real talk and telling me, that I don't know what I'm talking about, or that I need to stop thinking, that I'm not good enough. It's been very great.
That's terrific. Brian, I'd like to turn to you, my friend. So you mentioned George Floyd at the top. Certainly you are no stranger to conversations around diversity and solidarity. I'm just wondering what your reactions are to what you've heard so far, because certainly this has been an ongoing conversation in a lot of ways, but then to your point, this past year has really further emphasized it. What would you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, it's diversity's, it's almost, and I don't mean to make it biblical, right? But like the way that we handle things now it has to be different, right? Almost like pre-2020 and post-2020, right? Like what was acceptable prior to 2020, whether it's corporate, whether it's personal, whether it's where you stand and how you stand and what you stand on. It's a different conversation now, right? Like the days of really kind of like relegating your thoughts and just, people don't need to know where I stand. Well, no, it makes a difference, right? Like, and people do need to know where you stand, right? Because if you don't make a statement, then the assumption now is that you stand on the wrong side of where things are trying to go. And the big thing when we talk about so much of that work is that, like we said, the rules have changed, right? And even in the rules changing, people have to adapt to them, right? So you've seen so many different, whether we're talking corporations, whether we're talking, public office, public officials, whatever it is, everybody's taking a stab, an attempt, a focus, in putting an esteemed focus on diversity, on equity. And one of the things that we're starting to find out about all of these folks in the space of this conversation is that everybody's at a different space in the continuum, right? But the biggest thing that I always push people to do in this is start from where you are, right? Like it, I don't like, I laugh when I say it, but it's really how I feel, right? Like, I don't care where you're starting from. I don't care why you didn't do it in 2015. I don't care why you didn't do it in 95. I don't care. I don't care why you didn't do it when your company was started, right? Like, I don't care that inclusion wasn't built into the frameworks of your company from its inception, right? But here we are right now, and what are you going to do, and what are you willing to invest in order to change it, right? Because as we see right now, right, it's not even a context of just corporate practices, it's talent. It's everything, right? Like, people, I'm not going to work for a company, or I'm not going to feel comfortable being my most authentic and true self in a work environment where I don't know where they stand on issues that pertain to me and people that look like me, right? Like, that's how you get the best out of me. That's how you get the best out of the work that we're trying to create, right? And as our workforce continues to become more diverse every single day, right? Like, today on May 26th, 2021, this is as least diverse as our workforce will ever be from this point forward, right? Like, every single day moving forward, our workplace will be more diverse, and everyone has to adapt, right? So I think that when we talk about whether it's the companies, whether it's, in the talent is creating more accountability for the companies as well, right? Like, if you can't serve me and who I am, one, you're not going to get the best work out of me. But then secondarily, I'm going to go find a company who will stand up for me, who will stand on values and principles that I can relate to, connect to, and that feel like they value me as a human. But I think that it's such an interesting time, just because people are just at such different places in the continuum. But my biggest advice to everyone, whether that's government, public office, public organization, corporation, people, right? Like, individual humans, is start from where you are, right? Like, if you want to say, oh, I don't feel that way. No, if you don't start from where you really, really are, you're going to have to go back to where you really, really are, right? It's kind of like that self-work and so much self-development stuff that we talk about and do as well. So that's really where I stand, and I've seen a lot of the work from it stem from.
Yeah. So do you think people are ready to have this conversation, maybe more so than they were before, coming out of COVID? Something about your track record from just knowing you over the years is that you've been in a lot of these spaces, and you've heard folks talk about it. You've had a window into like where they are in that continuum. What's your sense? You mentioned that, your company works, so proximate to where the murder of George Floyd took place. What's been your sense of the response in that realm, and what does that tell us about Pittsburgh too?
I think that people are more willing than they have been.
Hmm.
I think that when we talk about being more willing than we have been, I think that there's also a piece of this where people don't know what they don't know, right? It kind of goes back to starting from where you are, right? And this is a journey, right? This isn't necessarily just like, hey, we're going to, here's the checklist, right? It doesn't really work like that, right? Like, we have to unlearn so much, right? And that's why I've always personally, like, the more I've done diversity work, the more I've equated it to self-development work, right? Like, there are so many things that we learn when we're not consciously thinking about the world in a conscious way, right? But at the same time, when we become conscious, you go there kind of kicking and screaming because you can't go back to being unconscious anymore, right? Like, you have to now you're aware, right? Now you're self-aware, now you're aware of the world as it is. And the same thing goes for diversity, right? Like, once you go down that road and you become aware, you can't become unaware anymore, right? Now you have to start working at the work. And now you have to also start like really unlearning a lot of the bad habits and the bad behaviors that you might have taken from the inception of time when it wasn't necessarily thought of, right? So I think that point is huge. But I also believe that the level and the amount of corporate accountability is a different thing and a different ball game. And I think that there are going to be corporations that adopt quickly and those that adopt slowly. And just like there are going to be corporations that adopt quickly and slowly, there are also going to be regions that adopt quickly and slowly. And I believe that our talent and the talent pools and the level of diversity that we have will reflect that, right? I mean, if we're going to be intentional and thoughtful and do things on purpose, then things will change. But if we want to try and accidentally work into these spaces, right, or almost do it on accident and hope that it has a tertiary result resulting in that, it doesn't really work that way. You have to do this work on purpose.
Yes. So let's, I appreciate that perspective. Let's zoom in. We, looking at the folks that are with us here in Zoom, we have a bunch of community folks that do incredible work in our region and through community-based organizations and on their own time. In prepping for this conversation, we spent some time talking about how we're feeling about this idea of transitioning back and how some of the learning about ourselves is informing how we think we might go about doing that. Keshira, I want to start with you because this theme of this concept of tenderness came up in our conversation. What is the role of tenderness from your perspective? And what are just your thoughts about transitioning back into society and into community?
Sure. I love this question. Tenderness is a place where I spend a lot of time. And it could be argued that many of us have been tenderized over this last year, the way that my mom used to tenderize chicken with that spiky mallet thing, right? Like if you hit it for a while, it kind of gives up and tenderizes. And some of us have also tenderized the other way, which is by marinating, by allowing ourselves to be still and let things wash over us, to really feel and let ourselves be tenderized. And either way, it would seem that all roads lead to feeling, the feeling that is required before we can really make any meaningful change. So this last week, while everybody was busy asking so many questions about the Middle East conflict, I was on a Zoom call with someone who said, my primary question is, have you cried about it yet? And it struck me in a particular way, because as a child, I was told that nothing really happens if you cry about something. Crying about it doesn't get your way, is what I was told. But to the contrary, crying about it opens a floodgate that comes from the heart. It allows the tenderness to be seen on the outside, and it's almost like flipping inside out and becoming made of Velcro. It helps us to connect to one another with more surface area, with more places to take hold and from which to hold one another. And I think that sometimes we fear being tender because it can be a portal to grief. But when we acquaint ourselves with the kind of grief that's rightful in a time like this, then it opens us up to greater possibility of being alive and of deeper meaning in our aliveness together. So yeah, that's me and tenderness, and anyone who wants to practice tenderness together is welcome to reach out.
I think you might have some folks ready to go on that journey with you. Etha, Brian, how are you feeling, coming into, this transition? We talked a little bit about the introverted, extroverted spectrum and how we feel about that. But you two are both someone that do a lot of extracurricular activity with literally getting people together and going, to community meetings. Maybe Etha, we'll start with you. What's on your heart in thinking about, this summer and going back?
Sure. Well, so when I'm not cooking Chinese food, I do still work at the city of Pittsburgh. I'm the senior civic innovation specialist for the Department of Innovation and Performance. So my primary roles are to manage PGH Lab, which is the government incubator for startup companies to test pilot their products and services with government. It's bringing new ideas to old government is always fun. And then also managing all of the external partnerships with the tech vendors, university partners, just the community in general in the tech space. And really what I've learned, honestly, is efficiency, because, before I'd hop on the bus, wait for like 20 minutes for the bus, get on, right? Like maybe get off at the wrong stop because I was texting and not paying attention. And now, I can literally have back-to-back meetings. But I think what that's truly taught me is that I just need to chill. And I think that that's a lesson that I've been forced to learn because, I've been just exhausted physically. And I feel like this is something that a lot of my friends and colleagues have also dealt with, because now they're in this kind of, I must be productive because I'm at home in my PJs, but then working themselves to a point where, they can't bring their best selves to work or at home. So Josiah, could you actually reiterate the question?
Yeah, just so going back, we've been having this virtual existence.
Going back. Yes.
We've heard about burnout for months now. Etha, as you don't know.
Yeah.
The summer, what does that look like from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Josiah. Clearly, I've become that chicken cutlet that Keshira was talking about. So yeah, I think just going back, realizing that in the US, we really have this I and me mentality. It's very about, every sentence starts with I, we think about us. And even like thinking about like a resume, right? It's like, I did this, I did that. And my family, for the majority of my extended family, they actually live in China, where, this is not the first pandemic that they've dealt with. SARS hit very hard. There's a lot of chronic air pollution, and it's always been a habit to wear a mask. And it's always been kind of a fashion statement like it is here now. And I thought it was dumb whenever I visited my relatives, right? Like, if I had a cold and I was visiting grandma, like I'd get chided, like, why aren't you wearing a mask, right? Do you want to get grandma sick? And I'm like, it's not about her, right? It's about me. Like I'm uncomfortable wearing a mask and I don't feel like it. And I think now it's been over a year of us beginning to have this community mentality of, taking care of people who we may not even know, because it's not about I or me, it's about us and we. So that's been a definite realization that's very different.
Brian,
Nice.
Brian, you're muted, but I'm wondering if you think what your reactions are, and do you think that lasts at all?
I hope so. Right? Like, I think I don't know how it doesn't last. Right? I think that one of the byproducts of COVID and of the things happening within COVID that happened was we removed what feels like, by moving into people's homes through Zoom meetings and different things along these lines, we've removed what I'm going to kind of use a show term when I say this, but like, we remove the fourth wall, right? Like, you don't necessarily have that aura of what was old professional, right? Like the Mad Men professional showing up in a suit with tie, with buttons and all those things, right? Like, we don't necessarily have that anymore. If you see someone and their cameras on, you could see a kid walk behind them, right? Or you've had conversations with other people's kids, but also in that, it's opened up so many more avenues and so many more spaces for real vulnerable connecting conversation, right? Like, when you talk about, going back to Keshira's point, when you talk about like, what's the role of tenderness? And she said, and correct me if I'm wrong when I say this, if I misspeak from what you meant, but tenderness opens up a space for grief to be felt and heard, right? Like, oh, geez, like, yes, exactly, right? We've experienced this level of vulnerability, not because it was necessarily about Black or brown or whatever color, right? This was something that everyone experienced all together, right? And in that, we all experienced this uncomfortability, regardless of whether you were an extrovert or an introvert or whatever else it was. But you experienced this space of uncomfortability, but also you've experienced the space of just really removing, I'll say, a lot of the armor that we wear on an every day, every week, every meeting basis, right? We've gotten more efficient. We've stopped with so much of the small talk, right? But at the same time, I believe that I don't believe that the world can go back to how it was. I pray that it doesn't. But I also hope and pray that we do keep this level of care for one another that feels very new, but also feels very good, right? Like, it's been cathartic, right? Having so many of these really real conversations with people that you kind of look at and it's like, oh, this conversation would have been reserved for somebody that I know really, really well, right? But you've connected with this person in a different type of way because we've removed so many of these barriers from connection. And that's crazy to say when you're not in person with people, right? But it's moved into this really, really unique space that I hope we keep. And I hope it even goes further when we go back to in person, right? Like I miss people asking, even in an in-person capacity, like, how are you? Like, how are you really? How are you feeling? Right? Like those different things that we have and we have these conversations about now that are real can really make a difference for where we want to take this world and where we want to take this country.
Yeah, Keshira, I wonder if you could help us go deeper there. We did spend some time in prep talking about this, how are you question and this idea of vulnerability. And you shared some reservations about kind of that of a quick transition back, like a snap back and things like that. What's on your heart there, and how should we think about it, I guess?
Well, I'm not sure how we, quote, should think about it, but I can tell you what I'm thinking about. I've been thinking about it since we first met a few days ago. Brian shared something. I hope, is it okay if I reflect back from that conversation, Brian? Great. Brian was describing the feeling of panic at the beginning of the pandemic, when all of the things that help extroverts to feel all right in the world were being torn away quickly. Announcements to stay home, not to socialize, not to do all the things that usually bring so much energy to folks who are energized by groups of people. And as he was describing it, I realized that we introverts are now going through that same thing now. I have this sense of panic those few minutes before the curtain opens and the spotlight, comes on. There it is, it's in my throat. I'm not ready. I'm not ready. And I know that my readiness is not a prerequisite to the world turning, right? The world is continuing to turn. People continue to have needs and desires, and there's every good reason to connect and to continue to care for one another. And at the same time, if our instinct is to go back to what's familiar, we run the risk of forsaking all of the deep relationships that have been created in the placeless places. To be more specific about it, in my own home community, I've had people say, why can't we just go back to being in person outside? We don't need to do the Zoom thing anymore. What does that mean for the person in a rural community who doesn't have an in-person to go back to anymore? Or who isn't in Pittsburgh, or who isn't able to access walking to get to the park location where we can be safely outside, or who doesn't drive at night, or whose immune system doesn't allow for them to be in a group of people yet. What of those people? If we hold on to the lessons of this year, hopefully we've learned to pay attention to the experiences of marginalized people. Someone said to me in a Zoom room some months ago, like, if we think about the most marginalized people, if it's safe for a trans Black woman to walk on the street at night, boom, it's automatically safe for everybody else. So rather than thinking about what do I need to do in order to be safe to go out at night, I have to think way beyond myself, to think what can I do to make it safe for someone else? Whether it's going out at night or simply even just being in a space again, how can we create the kind of access that doesn't just say, we'll make a space for you, you're welcome here, but really acknowledges that without you, what we're doing here isn't whole. And I don't have the answer to that, but what I do know is that it requires a slow pace and an intentional, heartfelt solidarity and community building to be able to bear the weight of the conversation. So I will continue, even though I find myself here on the margin, pushing back against the quick return and trying to return to a reality once was. There are so many reasons why we are well poised to do differently in this next phase. And I hope that we'll seize those opportunities tenderly.
Yes, to do differently is certainly a theme that resonates with me. And I see in the chat, Rabbi Jeremy, this idea of no going back, only the new normal. And we spent some time talking about this. And I hear a little bit about this in the responses we just had. What should some of those new normals, be ideally? And how do we kind of hold space for each person that's in their own journey with whether it's a level of comfort, a level of safety, a level of vulnerability? How can we be intentional there Let me just start with the first question. What is a new normal, Itha? From your perspective, what would you like to see ideally?
Well, I think so. I'm definitely an extrovert, and it was definitely challenging to stay at home, right? Like pick two people who you really like and spend time only with them for the next year. That was tough for me, right? Like I'm known in Pittsburgh for throwing parties. Like I'm that person who's working the room at a community event. And I think really the pandemic taught me about quality of friendships and relationships over quantity. And it's not that I don't care about, that person that I shook their hand at, like next to the cheese plate. But, like who do I want to impact? And who am I thinking about? And will they think about me in the same tender way? And that has been a realization that I think has hit a lot of extroverted people as well, is the quality over quantity. And what I'd also like to see is people being okay with not being okay, right? And like we're a country and a people of a lot of pride, right? Like we put on our best selves, we put on our beautiful face, right? And we go outside in our fresh clothes and shoes. But I think we've realized during the pandemic, right? Like people have lives, they have screaming babies, right? Like it's a thing and it's perfectly okay. And it's okay to have a life. It's okay to, not have showered today, right? Like people have things going on. And I'd like for us to just be more understanding and accepting of challenges people have in their lives, because it's not always just about work or, that professional handshake. We're human and we're imperfect, and that's okay.
Yes. I'm seeing a lot of head nods from my fellow panelists. Brian, why don't you jump on in there? What are your thoughts?
That was perfect. Like I literally, my reaction to the pandemic was, honestly, it was like, have you ever seen like you ever see a kid do like a delayed cry, right? Where it's like something happens and it's like they hit their leg and they go to make a cry face, but nothing comes out. And then like 5 seconds later, then they cry. That was me with the pandemic, right? Like I delayed, like I didn't think it was going to be everything that it was. And then it became that. And now, God bless my family, because to Etha's point, right? Like I was not okay with not being okay, right? And it took me so long. It felt like for me, right? Somebody who's used to moving and shaking, and now you're stuck in the house and you've got to figure out a completely new routine. It took me so long, it felt like, to really develop a level of acceptance, one, that I was going to be in the house, right? And that I wasn't going to be around people and all of those things. But then also developing an acceptance with this new normal and that I wasn't okay in it, right? I mean, that was something that was so huge for me, and just being okay with, to Etha's point, right? Like there are no perfect people, right? I think that one thing that I hope that we do take into, the future, into where we are now and where we're going, is that level of authenticity and that level of acceptance with where someone is, to Etha's point, right? Like I, I don't know how to go back to other things now, right? Like I've gotten there, I'm still an extrovert, right? I still love being around big groups of people and different things along those lines, right? Like that still kind of does it for me in a way. But also there are pieces of me that connection feels different, right? I value that interpersonal one-on-one connection and vibe that you get from someone when you have that type of conversation, right? That personal development, that self-assessment, that really self-awareness conversation that you can have with someone, that's what I value newly now. And I think that when we talk about going back out into the world, and to Keshira's point, I think it's such an important context that we don't want to, like, even myself as an extrovert, I don't want to rush back into the world, right? Like, I know I'm going to need a timeout, right? And I also don't want to do anything so that we have to do this all over again either, right? But I think just that level of thoughtfulness, and that thoughtfulness, not even necessarily just about yourself, but about others, right? And about where they are and where they're coming from and how we can support their space, right? Because not everybody's as comfortable going out in public as I am, right? And I'm not as comfortable staying in the house as everybody else, right? But wherever you are, you start from where you are, and that's okay. And I think just leveling on that level of acceptance and removing the pretentiousness from just our culture, that's been one of the, for me personally, that's been one of the more relaxing and amazing things, right? Like, I think I might have put on one suit, two suit jackets. Like, this is great. I have a collar on today. This is doing a lot. Josiah, I did this for you because you had one on in our training session, right? But I think just being able to really be who you are authentically and that being okay and that being enough. It's just amazing to me. That's been one of the greatest things about it. And I hope that stays.
Yes, I'm seeing snaps and head nods. Keshira, what do you think about what you've just heard, and how we can kind of honor our own authenticity with all of this too? You know, being open about where we're at, even as you know, it can be a very private journey in some ways. You know, how would you? Just what are your thoughts in that realm?
I've been joking that all the things that I was told not to be as a kid are suddenly making a comeback. I was one of those kids that was really sensitive, and I grew up to be one of those adults that's really sensitive. Um, I think when we reveal ourselves as we are, it allows us to show up more fully, and it gives permission for other people to do the same. And that's really important. I spent many years as a person who favors grief and melancholy, being kind of lonely and isolated, even in a crowd. And then the pandemic started. Everybody wanted to talk about grief and sadness and feelings and all the things. And I suddenly became very popular, which is hard for an introvert, but I'm good for a one-on-one. I tell people all the time when they come to me and say, I've got this anxiety, or I feel depressed, or I'm not okay. It's rightful to be experiencing those things in a world like this. It is the mark of a broken culture to live in a world like this and be okay. So I think this last year has brought us to our knees. Those who thought that by having a little more, or driving something a little newer, or moving to a bigger house, could protect themselves or ourselves from the not being okay, have found it to be inescapable. I mean, when there's nowhere to go, we have to confront ourselves. And if we can get through this feeling, I sometimes have that experience of confronting myself and not liking everything I see. This year has been a grand invitation to learn how to love my whole self, to not excise the pieces that I don't like, or only turn in a certain way so people can see the best side. It is simply too hard of an act to do for, I don't know what, 10 hours a day on Zoom, to be in a fixed position and only show one side, let alone if you've got crying children or dirty laundry, or you don't have a fancy virtual background, or whatever it is. I have found inevitably this year, many times, I cry every day in at least one Zoom room. Not as an insistence, but as a matter of course. And inevitably, when that happens, a beautiful relationship or connection or possibility of something that has yet to sprout comes into being. And it makes me wonder, why did I spend so many years emulating the folks who seem like they have it all together, hoping that maybe I could roll with their crowd, knowing just how exhausting that is. So I'm exhausted in different ways now, but I offer all of this as an encouragement. You know, we talk about diversity and the beauty and need for diversity. Our wholeness is part of the diversity, not just the best of ourselves. Sometimes the brokenness is the best of what we have to offer.
Yes. Two concepts that come to mind listening to you guys speak. One is one that I've encountered through yoga, which is when you're in these stretches, can you use the breath to can you send the breath to those areas, right? Can you breathe into that discomfort? And then I saw somewhere, I was reading in the past week, it was an encouragement. Can you give the most isolated parts of yourself some love today? And I thought that was just a really wonderful encouragement and invitation to consider, to your point, Keshira, the diversity that is within each of us. And if you were to consider what parts of yourself during COVID, in this moment, during this week, are isolated, what might those be? And then how can you show love to yourself in those ways, I think is a beautiful invitation. Well, look, we could clearly talk for much longer, but we want to respect everybody's time. I'd like to transition the conversation to some calls to action. You know, we all do enough Zooms and enough, broadcasts and things along those lines. Let's get practical if we can with those of us that are here, in the moment. Let's just go around. What's coming to your mind and heart for a call to action? This can be an encouragement to folks on their own journey. This can be around an organization or some way to get involved. But just whatever's on your heart in this moment. Brian, I'll start with you.
I think going back to Keshira's point, I think the wholeness piece is so huge, right? Because I don't know about anybody else, but during COVID, I had to experience every part of myself, right? The parts that I love, the parts that I'm not so fond of, all of those other things, right? Like you just had to experience it. And you could choose to ignore it, right? Or you could choose to actually try to observe it, observe it first and then deal with it and then say, oh, okay, that's a thing, right? And then maybe let it pass, but also just choose to deal with all of you, right? And I think that when we talk about a call to action with this, it's, be a kind person, right? I think that just kindness is such I don't want to call it even frowned upon, right? But it's just such a not so seen trait, right? Like I saw a meme earlier, it was like niceness, it was the difference between niceness and kindness. And niceness is almost like I don't want to call it a disposition, but it's almost like, oh, you're a nice person, right? And it was almost spoken as like, not really sure, but also be kind. Everybody's dealing with a battle that you aren't aware of. Somebody showing up for you in a moment doesn't mean they also have to show up for you every single other moment. And I think that also one of the other things when we talk about just a call to action is love on your people, right? Like love on your people, love on people who you don't know. This world is hard, it's harsh. To Keshira's point, I am a Black cisgendered man. And when we talk about not feeling okay with crying, when we talk about not feeling okay with not being okay, like imperfection in my, by the space of my intersections has resulted in death, right? The perception of imperfection has resulted in death. Even perfection has resulted in death, right? So it's like you're danged if you do, danged if you don't, right? But even in that, I think just really allowing for grace, right? Be graceful with yourself, be graceful with others that you're around, and just allow people a little bit of just latitude, right? Like everybody's dealing with something that you might not necessarily be aware of, and just allow for a little bit of grace of it. Thank you, Rabbi Jeremy, the power of empathy, just be a good person. That's it.
Thank you, Brian. Itha, what's your call to action?
Well, just to echo what Keshira and Brian have said, I think definitely leading with empathy. For me, a lot of it has, I think, just I've been able to build that because I admit when I don't know something, I just say I don't know, and that's cool. I think oftentimes when we find ourselves in professional spaces, you kind of have to fake it till you make it, right? You're like looking up stuff on your phone, like you could just say, I don't know. But then also on the flip side, right, try to educate yourself about, the ugly history of our country. We are not a perfect country, we're far from it. And, a lot of what we know today was taught in public school or by the people who we grew up with. And it's not a complete history. And it definitely reflects, all of the murders and the deaths that we see that impact our Black and Brown communities. And it's okay to be uncomfortable, right? I think we've all been pretty uncomfortable for a while now, but being okay with that because, I only know my lived experience, you only know your lived experience, but that doesn't mean that we can't try to understand the lived experiences of other people and use our voices to elevate theirs. So I'm definitely going to plug this show right now, which is free for those of you who don't feel like paying $30 on Netflix. or on Amazon Prime. So PBS actually did an excellent 5-episode show, and it is narrated by Daniel Day Kim, for those of you who are a fangirl of his. But it talks about the history of Asian Americans, and May is Asian Heritage Month. And traditionally, right, like a lot of Asian heritage celebrations have been more of the kind of beautiful songs and dances and delicious foods, and kind of glossing over the unhappy history of Asians in America, and also the intersections that it has with Black and Native history, which I think PBS does very well because it's PBS. You can't go wrong.
Yeah, we love PBS. Thank you, Itha. And we'll make sure for those that are watching on Facebook that those links, that link is put in the chat as well. Keshira, final call to action.
Sure. I'm going to give a call to action and a call to inaction, if that's okay. So the first is to lean into nature. What I've learned this past year from walking the same routes almost every day is that if I pay attention, I can watch things blooming, and then I can also watch them withering. I've watched a complete turn of seasons for the first time in more than a decade of traveling. And it's a great reminder when I feel like I'm not okay and I can't deal with the uncertainty, that there's something greater than us that is cycling and that we're inside of it. So the call to action is maybe to just pay a little more attention to the subtlety around us. And of course, the call to inaction is to let ourselves rest. Rest, to me, in addition to being a deep gift of Jewish tradition, is the ultimate act of resistance in a culture like ours. In a culture that wants us to produce and go and be and show up and all the things, there's a time and a place for it. We can do it so much better when we're sustained by rest. Rather than squeezing that toothpaste tube and having one good toothbrush when it's new, we can squeeze it slowly and take a break in between and find the rhythm and pace that's right for us. As I said to someone this week, I've only now, after a year, figured out, rather than trying to do everything for everyone, I could do a little less for longer. And that too would be a blessing. So unfortunately, or fortunately, I have to go and co-teach now. So I'm going to love you and leave you. Thank you to everybody who's included me here and made this possible. It's been a beautiful conversation, and I hope to continue.
Sure. Thank you so much for being with us. We so much appreciate it. All right, everybody. I mean, what more can you add, to that? It reminds me, I saw a quote recently that was along the lines of, when you see a tree, you just allow it. And can you embody that practice with our neighbors, with people as you encounter them, to not sit in a place of judgment, but to simply just allow to begin with. And I think that's a powerful reminder, something I'm impressed upon by hearing Keshira speak. So look, we're going to transition to breakout rooms, which means we also must say goodbye to our friends on Facebook Live. We want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. And you can find the recording on the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh's page after this. But please get involved with the organizations you've heard mentioned, or reach out to get plugged in. And please have a good night. For the rest of us, we're going to do brief breakout rooms and then come back in 20 minutes or so to kind of just share space one last time, share any final reflections, and then get on with our, with our lives in community. And we have a prompt for the breakout rooms, not super structured, just a moment for everyone, to lean in and to speak with one another. And it's a little bit of a smaller setting. But our prompt is, what kind of lasting change would you like to see? And how do we make these things permanent? So with that, we'll ask the mighty Wizard of Oz to move us into breakout rooms. And we'll see you guys in about 20 minutes back here. All right. I imagine that breakouts are an invitation for folks to duck out discreetly. And I say that because that's normally what I do. Well, you want me to do something? I'm out. But anyways, I just wanted to say thanks to everyone who stuck it out with us. And I hope that the breakout rooms were in some way meaningful. And once folks all get back here, just a couple minutes of anything that stuck out to them. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for staying with us. Any things that stuck out to you about the breakout rooms or the themes that you heard tonight? We won't keep everybody over long, but since we're all kind of just here in this moment, want to honor that and see what folks think or feel.
I'll get us going. In our group, we talked about boundaries and creating intentional, deeper space. So a lot of what was echoed by the panelists. So a lot of that just really resonated and was like, how do we put it to practice? How do we create boundaries from others, but also boundaries from ourselves, overstepping our own protection of that space and preserving the intentionality that this past year has hopefully encouraged us all and thrust it upon us.
Thanks, Betty. Anybody else? See a comment from Claire. I really appreciated the themes of kindness to everyone as we build a new normal and creating time for self. Certainly resonate with that.
Our group talked a lot about how we spent and gained energy over the course of the past year, the ways we needed other people and other people needed us, and in some cases, the ways we needed to create space between us and other people. And one of the things that I had shared when we were talking about rest as when we were talking about energy was sort of the differences between what rest means and what we're resting from. You know, the difference between work and labor, and how we make distinctions between the expenditure of energy and how we recharge as well.
Thank you, sir. Brian, I see that you unmuted.
I was going to chime in with the same thing that Rabbi Jeremy said. We had a conversation around just, you know, just the context of just really honoring your own needs, like especially during a time that is so unique for all of us, right? And also in honoring your own needs, honoring the needs of your loved ones, right? I mean, that's something that's so important, right? Like I think at the beginning of the pandemic, I remember even like jokingly when we would all kind of laugh and be like, all right, who are you in the pandemic? Who are you in lockdown with? Right. And then you think about that context and that's so crazy, but you really were. Right. So in that, you had to understand a completely different version of this person who you had known to grow in love, potentially, just because the conditions had changed. And I think that just honoring that grace and just trying to find a space of kindness and a space of just general understanding for humans not being okay, right? Like I gave myself as an example. In the beginning of the pandemic, it wasn't even the context of like me seeing like the world shutting down and being like the dog in the meme with the fire all around them saying this is okay, right? It wasn't that, but it was also this space of this isn't really happening. I don't have to adjust to this. This is like, it was like a self-denial thing for a while. And then I had to really deal with it. And it was like, oh, it was like this delayed reaction. And it was just tough. But just giving yourself that space and that grace to be able to deal with things how you need to, and then moving through it. And resting in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this idea of rest came up and has come up a lot recently because of Zoom burnout and how we can be like we're overscheduled in one way, like we're not really going anywhere, but it's back to back to back to back to back, you know, into the evening, all day, every day, and the toll that takes. I remember we were engaging with a bunch of organizations that serve youth going into the new year, and we felt like we had some momentum, and then things just seemed to go off of a cliff in terms of like feedback or follow up, and it kind of dawned on us that it feels like it's a new year because it's January and we just came through like a holiday season, but it's also like month, 9, 10 of the pandemic, and we need to honor that. And so yeah, certainly a new normal for me personally going back is not to overschedule and to have balance and time for rest. Anyone else as we're wrapping up and closing here? Any final thoughts for folks that for the breakout room or the discussion, or just something that's on your mind? Going once. Okay. Well, did I hear something? No.
I just wanted to say thank you so much. This has been really nice. I don't know how I got this invite but but I'm so glad I did. And I really have taken, I have a lot to take away and think about and reflect on. And I think her name was Keshira, who was on earlier. Was kind of transitioning from a after school program that I was working in and traveling home, but I could hear her and couldn't chime in, but I could hear her. And man, I want to be more tender. I really felt connected to a lot of the information that she was putting out, and just everybody really gave some great perspective, and it's really has filled me up, and I feel great having participated. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and we're glad you can make it. How do you say your name?
Twyla.
Twyla. Thank you, Twyla. We appreciate your time and interest. It's awesome. All right, everybody. Well, listen, what we certainly don't want to do is stretch things over long. So I just want to conclude where I started, which is with gratitude. Thank you for your time. I want to thank the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh team. I want to encourage those of us that are still here to check them out. If you thought this was cool virtual programming, you should see the kind of things they've been doing recently and the things that they have coming up. My favorite World Affairs Council, for what that's worth, and certainly a really cool team over there that really helped put this together. So thank you. And then also Repair the World and One Hood for being about this life and about this work, before that, and allowing, the space for us as the 412 Black Jews Collaborative and these other voices, to join you, in stream, so to speak. Very much meaningful to us. Please check out the 412 Black Jews Collaborative online, One Hood, Repair the World Pittsburgh. There's a lot of great work going on, and as you feel resonant and as you feel motivated, please get involved, and we'll see you out there, in community as neighbors. So that's it for me. Betty, World Affairs Council team, whatever you'd like to do, and we'll get out of here.
Just invite everyone, if you can unmute yourselves together, and we can just extend a goodbye. Thank you, everyone.